She was entering my house.
Hi Herr, first of all I want to thank you for all the effort you put into bringing these videos. I really enjoy them in my spare time. Precisely because of this, I wish to share what was fortunately the only experience of harassment I have ever experienced. For privacy reasons, I will change the names and would prefer to remain anonymous. It all happened in my senior year of high school. As background, at that time I was part of a dance group organized by a cultural house. Some participants were classmates from my school, although most came from other grades and classrooms. In determining the dance partners, I was assigned to a girl who, to protect her identity, I will call Jade. A mutual friend, whom I will name Fatima, mentioned to me that, like me, it was Jade's first time being involved in such an activity. Thanks to this and Jade's attitude, I quickly found an affinity with her, and we forged a good friendship. For about 2 weeks, Jade and I rehearsed 3 times a week for almost 2 hours each day. Given the time we shared, it was only natural that our relationship grew stronger. On one occasion, I invited her to my home to practice a particularly challenging step. Although her home was closer, she did not have the space to rehearse. Fatima joined us, and we enjoyed a pleasant chat in the courtyard of my residence. At the end of our practice, they both left, and I continued with my activities. A few days later, when I returned home, I realized that I had misplaced my keys. It is worth mentioning that due to family circumstances, on weekends, from Friday to Sunday, I was completely alone at home. Therefore, the loss of my keys was a great inconvenience. Fortunately, Jade contacted me to inform me that she had found my keys and kindly offered to bring them to my location. I was deeply relieved and expressed my gratitude. However, I never imagined what would happen next. Starting the following Friday, I began to notice strange situations in my home. For context, my house is located at the top of a hill. Although there were several nearby homes, businesses, and a public transportation route, my house faced a vacant lot. This lot was occasionally used as a shortcut by passers-by during the early morning and evening hours. Occasionally, I would hear noises in the yard and notice shadows moving in front of the windows. Since I have several cats, and one of them frequently attracts neighborhood cats, I didn't pay much attention to these anomalies. However, after a couple of weeks, I began to notice unusual situations, especially upon waking up or after taking a shower. For example, my sandals were not where I remembered leaving them, or I would find glasses of water that I did not remember using. Since I am a distracted person, the kind of person who can spend minutes looking for a broom that is inadvertently under my arm, I used to ignore these small discrepancies and continue with my daily routine. About 2 months went by, continuing with rehearsals and sharing moments with Jade and Fatima. During those weekends, those strange situations I mentioned kept happening, although I didn't pay much attention to them. However, one particular weekend, my then-girlfriend decided to stay over at my house. During the wee hours of the morning, she woke me up very frightened, claiming that she had seen someone watching us from outside the room, who hid as soon as she looked at him. Still half asleep, and not having had any frightening experiences in the 6 years I had lived there, I reassured her that it had probably been one of my cats watching from a piece of furniture in the hallway that connects the living room to the bedrooms. On Monday afternoon, before leaving school and during a free class, Fatima pulled me aside to talk privately. When I asked her what was going on, she commented that Jade was aware of my actions and no longer wanted to continue with the rehearsals. Fatima urged me to resolve the situation and apologize to Jade. Confused, I asked her to clarify what she was talking about. Visibly irritated, Fatima accused me of having been unfaithful to Jade, arguing that she had proof. Showing me the photos she had in her possession, I saw images of my girlfriend and me taken from afar. I explained to her that this was my girlfriend and that I had no idea what she meant by her accusations. Frustrated, she told me how Jade felt betrayed that I had lied to her. She then showed me more pictures of Jade and me. As the pictures went by, she had fewer clothes on, and since it was summer and I was sleeping in just my underwear, it was easy to misinterpret the situation, except for one detail. In all the pictures, I was asleep. Fatima calmed down a bit when she saw my genuine reaction of shock. In her words, I looked pale as wet paper. She understood that I didn't know anything about it. The rest of the time, my friends and I showed her evidence confirming that I was telling the truth. Through the photos and stories we shared, I began to understand the strange situation I had been living. Everything unusual that I had noticed in my home over the past few months began to make sense. It turns out that Jade had fabricated a love story with me and was relating every fictional detail of our relationship to Fatima. At some point, Jade began spying on me, learning my routines and the days I was home alone. Since her parents did not keep a close eye on her, she led them to believe that she would spend several weekends at Fatima's house, her lifelong friend. Fatima, unsuspecting, agreed to be her alibi. To my surprise, Jade had made copies of my keys. When I was away, she would break into my house and found a hiding place in an unfinished room in the backyard. Although she only used it occasionally for storage, she made it her temporary refuge. Despite my deep sleep, I never imagined that someone could be so close without me noticing. Over time, Jade began to take courage, and the more emboldened she became, the more clothes she took off. At the same time, she was beginning to be encouraged to make more physical contact. It never got to anything explicitly sexual, but it did get to a point where I had a girl practically naked next to me who, it seemed, was staying up all night and running away very early in the morning. Jade was telling Fatima all this, and naturally, when she saw that my real girlfriend was staying the night, she spied on us. It was her she saw that night that she got scared, but as I said, I didn't give her any importance, which allowed her to hide in another room or the kitchen to escape in the morning. That was what she told Fatima, and why she was so angry with me. Finally, when confronting Jade after school, she tried to justify her actions with twisted logic, believing that my kind gestures toward her were signs of romantic interest. Although I was furious, I decided not to take legal action against Jade on the condition that she seek professional help, as it was clear that she was facing deep psychological problems. Put yourself in my shoes for a moment. Imagine all the actions they perform in the privacy of their homes, believing they are alone, from imitating JoJo's poses in front of the mirror to receiving intimate gifts from their partners. They trust that they are safe in a private and peaceful environment. However, one day they discover that they were not only exposed, but also at the mercy of an emotionally unstable person who not only broke into their homes and beds, inventing a fictitious romance, but also felt hurt when this fictitious bond did not develop as expected. If someone is capable of going to such extremes, what else would they be capable of? If you think that waking up next to a stranger doesn't sound so bad, visualize this scene. You go to sleep all alone, and in the depth of the night, you wake up to a woman with pale skin, long black hair covering part of her face, standing next to you or on top of you. The only thing you can clearly make out are her eyes staring at you in the silence. Many of you will probably remember a scene from a Japanese horror movie, such as The Curse, rather than think of a romantic or adult scene. Can you imagine the impact of such a scare? Thanks for reading me, Herr. I wish you much success, and again, thanks for everything.
Dark feelings.
Good evening. Good afternoon or good morning, Herr. My name is Karimi. I am from Panama, and I am 13 years old. It is important that you take into account my age to understand the context of my situation. I have been following you for several months, and I am fascinated by your content and your way of narrating, especially because it lends itself as a good ambient sound. Although I have listened to many stories and introductions from others, I am having a hard time figuring out how to start my own. I thank you in advance for taking the time to read it. When I was born, my parents were quite young, so in a way, I was their first attempt at parenting. During my first 2 years, my mother devoted herself entirely to me, as she was laid off from her job because of the pregnancy. My father was still working, so the days were divided between my mother and me during the day, and then with my father in the evenings. However, when I turned 3, my mother found a job and left me in the care of my grandmother's family. My grandmother, whom I will call Zulia to maintain her privacy, is the oldest of 7 siblings. Mostly I spent my time with my aunts Maria and Sandra. If my memory serves me correctly, I used to be more with my Aunt Maria, and as I got a little older, I started to accompany her and her daughter on walks in the surrounding area. It was on one of those walks that I met Hector, a man who must have been in his 50s at the time. He was a church father, and as I understand it, a close friend of the family, which makes it even more difficult to share what follows. Well, I'll start by telling you that this gentleman and I had a good relationship. He would call my aunt and tell her he wanted to see me, so we would either go to his house or he would pick us up, take us wherever we wanted, and always fulfill my whims. When we stayed at his house, my aunt would leave us alone in his room, and we would play on his bed. It was nothing bad. We would tickle each other or run around. I would draw with him and we would play that I would kill him for some reason. I was always cuddling with him. In fact, I would call him my life and kiss him on the cheek. He would hold me and keep me close always. Now that I am grown up and think about it, I wonder, why didn't anyone put a stop to both of our behaviors? I don't know, and it disturbs me. Due to situations external to this, my mother distanced herself from Maria, and consequently, I did the same. I gradually stopped going to her house and seeing Hector, growing up alone with my parents, my grandparents, my Aunt Sandra and her family, and the rest of the extended family on my grandfather's side. It stayed that way until last year. Now I see my Aunt Maria and her daughter more often because they go to my grandmother's house. And now I have more contact with Hector too. The first time I spoke to Hector again after so many years was on a visit to his house. Initially, it didn't seem like a bad idea, but as the time approached, an uneasy feeling came over me. As I crossed the threshold of his home, that feeling intensified. As I encountered him, it was no longer a simple discomfort at the reunion after so long. It was something deeper, though not quite fear. Despite the time, his appearance had not changed drastically, although he did look older. His eyes somehow reminded me of a shark. In his room, there were more people, probably his family. As soon as he saw me, he greeted me enthusiastically. I reciprocated the greeting out of politeness, and although reluctant, approached him for a hug when he requested it. But instead of releasing me, he made me sit on his leg and grabbed me by the waist as he introduced me to those present, recalling anecdotes from the past. With each passing minute, my desire to run away increased, but I had to remain in that state for an hour and a half before I could return to my grandmother. From that day on, every time I visited my grandmother and my Aunt Maria was present, I used to call Hector. He always remembered shared moments and told me that he always thought of me and wanted to see me. In the calls, he would always start telling me things we used to do together and wished he could spend more time with me, while I felt uncomfortable and alone, because I couldn't tell anyone about how he made me feel. I have reflected, and I think Hector still sees me as that little girl of yesteryear. He cannot accept that I have grown up and that the dynamic has changed. My memories with him have a special place, as they marked my childhood. However, looking at them now, I feel as if those beautiful moments are being tainted by dark feelings that make me sick. Herr, I feel fear. Fear of expressing my feelings and causing a rift in my family, of being judged or even ruining an older man's life for what I consider my foolishness. I am lost. That is why I am writing to you. In you I see a refuge, since you don't know me, and that gives me some security. I have no idea if this fits for one of your videos, however. I know that I am not the only one living this kind of situation. I know that I am not alone, and that relieves me.
I was a stalker.
Hello, Herr. I hope you are well. I want to share a story with you, and for you to understand that I have changed, and I am deeply sorry for my actions. I am currently 18 years old. When I was 13, in my freshman year of high school, I was attracted to a boy 2 years older than me. At first, I only watched him during breaks, but over time, this interest turned into an obsession. I managed to find out his name, and after a search, I found his profile on Instagram. Somehow, this led me to learn details about his life, such as his class schedule and full name. At the time, I saw my actions as simple curiosities, justifying that I was not harming anyone. However, I now understand how wrong I was. My days began to revolve around him. In free classes, I would walk about 3 or 4 times in front of his classroom just to see him. And even though classes were suspended in September due to teacher strikes, upon returning in 2019, my obsession did not cease. One day, while I was riding the bus to school, I saw this boy walking down the street toward the school. This led me to deduce that he lived nearby. Despite knowing that I had already crossed many boundaries, I decided to go further. One day, I convinced my sister to explore that same area in search of a green-colored house, because thanks to a photo on her Instagram, I knew that color was his home. After much searching, I finally saw it standing outside her front door. My obsession reached a point where I not only knew details about his life, but also about his family and friends. Thankfully, this all ended for me in 2020 at the start of the pandemic. By force, I had to stop all this. Looking back, I feel deep remorse that I was a stalker. I fooled myself into believing it was simple child's play, but now every time I remember that I staged such an act, it makes me want to vomit from the disgust of knowing that I was like that at one time. I wish someone had told me that it wasn't right, and that boy could never match the fantasies I had in my mind. If I could go back in time, it would make me rethink the gravity of my actions. Thank you for reading, Herr.